They called it stolen valor, a lie whispered in a courtroom fueled by my father's greed. But the truth of my service was a secret far deadlier than any lie, a truth that could unravel a general and bury us all. The air in the courtroom was stale, thick with the scent of old paper and cheap polish. It was a smell I'd come to associate with betrayal. I sat at the defendant's table, my back ramrod straight, my knuckles white where I gripped the polished wood. Across the room, my father, Richard, sat next to his slick, reptilian lawyer. He wasn't looking at me. Instead, he was staring straight ahead at the judge, a small, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. It was the same smirk he'd worn my entire life, the one that said, "I'm smarter than you, I'm better than you, and I will always win." My sister Chloe sat behind him, a row back. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Every time I tried to catch her gaze, she would suddenly find something fascinating about her own hands, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. She was a co-plaintiff in this whole charade, but I knew she was just a puppet. Dad was pulling the strings. He always had. The whole thing was a nightmare spun from greed. Our grandfather, a proud veteran of the Korean War, had passed away 6 months ago. He'd left the bulk of his considerable estate, his house, his investments, his legacy, to me. Chloe got a generous trust fund, and my father got a token amount and a letter. I never read the letter, but I saw the look on his face after he did. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Grandpa's will had one specific ironclad clause. It stated that the inheritance was contingent upon the beneficiary being of upstanding moral character, embodying the values of honor, integrity, and service. It was a clause written by a soldier, for a soldier. My grandfather and I had shared that bond. He'd been my hero, the one who'd inspired me to enlist, the only one who truly understood the part of me that had been forged in the dust and fire of Afghanistan. My father, a man who had spent his life chasing money and cutting corners, had never understood it. He'd resented it. And now, he was using it as a weapon. And so, Your Honor, my father's lawyer, Mr. Davies droned on, his voice oozing a false sincerity that made my skin crawl. We are not here to dispute Mr. Alex Evans's claims of service out of disrespect for our nation's armed forces. Quite the contrary. We are here to protect the honor of those who have truly served. My own lawyer, a young, overworked public defender named Sarah, shifted uncomfortably beside me. We were outgunned, and she knew it. Davies gestured towards me with a dramatic sweep of his hand. We are here today because Richard and Chloe Evans have reason to believe that the defendant, my client's own son and brother, has been living a lie that disrespects his grandfather's memory and flagrantly violates the moral character clause of the will. We are here to allege, he paused, letting the words hang in the silent room, a case of stolen valor. A gasp rippled through the small gallery. I felt the blood drain from my face. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Stolen valor. It was the most disgusting accusation you could level at someone who had worn the uniform. It was a poison dart aimed at the very core of my identity. I risked a glance at my father. His smirk had widened. He leaned over and whispered something to Davies, who nodded grimly. My father then settled back in his chair, adjusting the knot of his expensive silk tie, looking for all the world like a concerned citizen reluctantly doing his civic duty. The performance was sickeningly perfect. My client, Mr. Richard Evans, Davies continued, a respected local business owner, began to have his doubts years ago. Alex was always vague about the details of his deployment. He rarely spoke of it. He brought home no medals, no commendations of note. When his grandfather would ask him to share stories to regale him with tales of heroism, Alex would demur, claiming it was too painful to speak of. Davies started pacing in front of the judge's bench. A noble sentiment, perhaps, or a convenient excuse for a man with no stories to tell. A man who perhaps spent his deployment working a desk job in a safe zone, or worse, never left the country at all. We have sworn testimony from neighbors who claim to have seen Alex at his apartment during periods he was supposedly overseas. We have photographs, Your Honor, from his own social media of him at barbecues and ball games, time-stamped during his alleged tour in a combat zone. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. The photos were from my 2-week leave. The neighbors were mistaken, seeing me come and go at odd hours because of the crippling insomnia and PTSD I'd brought back with me. The reason I didn't talk about my experiences was because you can't explain the sight of a fallen brother to a man who measures life in stock dividends. You can't describe the taste of sand and fear to a family that thinks sacrifice is skipping their vacation to renovate the kitchen. They were twisting my silence, my pain, into a confession of fraud. My lawyer, Sarah, stood up. Objection! Your Honor, Mr. Davies is presenting speculation and hearsay as fact. My client's military record is sealed, as is standard for his unit's operations. But his DD-214 is a matter of public record and proves an honorable discharge. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, looked down at her. And have you submitted this DD-214 into evidence, counsel? Sarah's face fell slightly. We have been unable to obtain a certified copy on such short notice. Your Honor, the request is pending with the Department of Defense, but my client has his personal copy. Davies laughed, a short, sharp bark of a sound. His personal copy? Your Honor, a document that could be forged on any home computer. We are talking about an estate worth millions of dollars. The temptation to fabricate such a document is immense. The fact is the defense has provided no verifiable official proof of the service my client's son, so proudly, yet so vaguely, claims as his own. He walked back to his table and picked up a file. What we do have, he said, his voice dropping, is a pattern of deceit. He presented the photos to the clerk. He read the neighbors' confused statements. He painted a picture of me as a lazy, manipulative fraud who had tricked a decorated old man into leaving him a fortune. I watched my father, the architect of this entire demolition. He shook his head slowly, a look of profound, theatrical sadness on his face, as if my very existence was a source of deep personal pain for him. That was what finally broke me. Not the lies, not the accusation, but that look. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of it. This was the man who missed my graduation from basic training because of a can't-miss golf tournament. The man who, when I called him from a satellite phone on a desolate FOB in Kandahar, complained about his stock portfolio taking a dip. The man whose entire concept of honor was tied to the logo on his car. The rage inside me was a white-hot furnace. I wanted to stand up and scream. I wanted to list every single one of my friends' names who didn't come home. I wanted to show them the scars on my back and the deeper ones in my soul that would never, ever heal. I wanted to make them understand. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of the lie happening in a place that was supposed to be about truth. Davies finished his presentation with a final damning flourish. Your Honor, Alex Evans is not a hero. He is a parasite who preyed on his grandfather's patriotism. He does not meet the standard of upstanding moral character. He meets the standard of a common con artist. He is unworthy of his grandfather's legacy, and we ask the court to nullify the inheritance and execute the will's alternate provisions, which name my clients, his father and sister, as the rightful heirs. He sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. My father's smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of somber gravity. He had played his part. He thought he had won. He shot me a quick, triumphant glance, his eyes glittering with a cold, hard light. Judge Miller looked over all the documents Davies had submitted. She peered over her glasses, first at him, then at my father. Finally, her gaze settled on me. It was heavy, impassive, impossible to read. My throat was dry. My hands were slick with sweat. I felt like the loneliest man on earth, a ghost in my own life story. "Mr. Evans," the judge said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "These are incredibly serious allegations. Your father and sister have presented a narrative, backed by what they claim is evidence of deceit. You have offered nothing but a pending request for a document. Do you have anything at all to say in your defense?" All eyes were on me. The weight of their collective gaze felt physical, a pressure on my chest. I could feel Sarah's hand on my arm, a gentle but firm warning to stay silent, to let her handle it. But her strategy wasn't working. We were being buried under an avalanche of carefully constructed lies, and she was trying to fight it with a teaspoon. I looked at my father, at that smug, predatory confidence, and I knew that silence was no longer an option. Silence was consent. Silence was defeat. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The scrape of its legs against the linoleum was unnervingly loud in the quiet room. I stood up, my body feeling stiff and foreign. I didn't look at my lawyer. I didn't look at my sister, whose head was now bowed so low her hair curtained her face. I looked directly at my father. For the first time since the proceedings began, he was forced to meet my gaze. His smirk faltered just for a second, a tiny crack in his perfect facade. "Quote 3, I began, my voice hoarse. I cleared my throat and started again, stronger this time. "Quote 4. A murmur went through the room. Beside me, Sarah stiffened. Davies, my father's lawyer, leaned forward, a gleam of anticipation in his eyes. They thought I was about to confess. "He's correct that I don't talk about my time in the service. He's correct that I didn't come home and hang medals on the wall or tell stories around a campfire. He's correct that if you search for my name in public records, you won't find tales of heroism." I paused, letting my words settle. "Where he is mistaken," I continued, my voice dropping, becoming hard as granite, "is in his conclusion. He assumes the absence of evidence is the evidence of absence. He sees an empty stage and presumes there was no play. But my father has only ever understood the kind of theater you can see." I turned my attention to Judge Miller, speaking to her as if we were the only two people in the room. "Your Honor, there's a reason my records are sealed. There's a reason my DD 214, while stating an honorable discharge, is purposefully vague on commendations and operational details. It's not because I was a clerk. It's because my unit did not officially exist." Another ripple of whispers. Davies shot to his feet. "Objection. Your Honor, the defendant is concocting a fantasy straight out of a spy movie. This is absurd." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. She was looking at me now with a new intensity. The impassive mask was gone, replaced by sharp, analytical curiosity. "Continue, Mr. Evans," she said, her voice even. I took a deep breath. This was it. The point of no return. My grandfather understood. He never pushed for details. He served in Korea. He knew that some doors are closed for a reason. He knew that the most important service is often the most silent. My father only understands what he can brag about at his country club. The idea that someone would do something difficult, something dangerous, without receiving a parade for it is completely alien to him. I risked a glance at Richard. His face was a thundercloud of confusion and rage. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. "The photos Mr. Davies presented," I said, turning back to the judge, "were from my mid-tour leave, a 2-week pass. I spent it trying to feel normal, trying to forget the things I'd seen. The reason my neighbors saw me at odd hours is because I don't sleep most nights. Not anymore. The ghosts of the men I served with don't keep a 9-to-5 schedule." The air in the room was electric now. The stale, bureaucratic atmosphere had been replaced with something raw and real. I cannot present you with commendations that were never formally issued. I cannot ask you to unseal records that are classified at a level far above the authority of this court. To do so would not only violate my oath, it would endanger the lives of men still operating in the field. I let that hang there. The gravity of it. This was no longer just about a will. My father and his lawyer have built a case on innuendo because that's all they have. They are demanding proof they know is impossible for me to provide in an open court. It's a clever, cynical trap. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. But I am not without recourse, and I am not without proof. My heart was a drum against my ribs. Sarah was looking at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. My father was pale, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by a dawning unease. He had expected me to crumble, to cry, to get angry. He hadn't expected me to fight back with weapons he didn't understand. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear, locking eyes with Judge Miller, "I cannot and will not discuss the nature of my service in this public forum. However, I can provide verification that will satisfy any questions this court may have about my character, my integrity, and my honor. I formally request that you clear the courtroom of all non-essential personnel. I am prepared to give my testimony under oath. On the condition that the transcript is sealed by court order due to matters of national security." The courtroom erupted. Davies was on his feet instantly, his face flushed with indignation. "Your Honor, this is an outrageous theatrical stunt. The defendant is attempting to circumvent due process with these cloak and dagger theatrics. National security? He's trying to hide the fact that he has no evidence by wrapping himself in the flag." My father, Richard, was right behind him, his voice a low growl of fury directed at my lawyer. "You can't let him do this. This is a family matter." "Not some state secret." Chloe was staring at me now, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, a pawn in a game that had suddenly escalated far beyond her comprehension. But Judge Miller wasn't looking at them. Her gaze was fixed on me, sharp and penetrating, as if she were trying to see straight through my skin and weigh the truth of my soul. The chaos in the room seemed to fade into a dull roar around us. She held up her hand again, and this time the silence that fell was immediate and absolute. Even Davies snapped his mouth shut. "Quote 21, she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Quote 22. She let the threat hang in the air for a beat before turning her attention back to me. "Quote 23. "Quote 24. I replied, my voice unwavering. "Quote 25. I could see the conflict on her face. She was a judge, a creature of precedent and procedure. What I was asking for was a radical departure from the norm, but I could also see a flicker of something else in her eyes, a deep-seated respect for the institutions I was alluding to. She was from a generation that still understood that not every hero's name made it into the newspapers. She was silent for a long, agonizing minute, her steepled fingers pressed against her lips as she considered the situation. My father was practically vibrating with rage. He had built what he thought was a perfect cage of logic, and I had just produced a key he had never imagined existed. He thought this was a battle of paperwork, of public records and neighborhood gossip. He had no idea how to fight a war in the shadows. Finally, the judge spoke. "The request is unorthodox," she stated, "but the accusation of stolen valor is one of the most serious that can be made against a veteran. It strikes at the very heart of the moral character clause central to this dispute. I am not willing to dismiss either the plaintiff's claims or the defendant's proposed testimony without due diligence." She looked directly at Davies. "Mr. Davies, your case rests on the argument that Mr. Evans's military record is suspiciously blank. He is now offering to fill in those blanks, under penalty of perjury, in a manner he claims is necessitated by the sensitive nature of his service. If he is lying, He will be perjuring himself in a secure setting regarding matters of national security, a crime far more severe than simple probate fraud. Are you so certain of your position that you wish me to deny his request and rule on the evidence you've presented alone?" It was a masterstroke. She had turned their own argument against them. Davies was trapped. If he objected, it would look like he was afraid of the truth. If he agreed, he would lose control of the proceedings. He stammered for a moment, glancing back at my father, who looked utterly lost. The smirk was a distant memory, replaced by a pallor of fear. We of course want the court to have all the facts, Your Honor," Davies finally managed, the confidence gone from his voice. "Very well," the judge declared, her voice ringing with authority. "This court will recess for 30 minutes. When we resume, this courtroom will be cleared of all non-essential personnel. That includes the plaintiffs, Mr. Richard and Mrs. Chloe Evans." My father lurched forward. "What? I have a right to be here. I'm the plaintiff." "You have a right to be represented by counsel, Mr. Evans, which you are," Judge Miller retorted, her patience clearly worn thin. "Mr. Davies will remain. But if your son's testimony is indeed a matter of national security, your presence and your daughter's would be a breach of protocol. The testimony will be given, recorded, and sealed. I alone will hear it and rule on its relevance to the matter at hand. Bailiff, please escort everyone but the defendant and legal counsel from the courtroom." A burly bailiff moved towards the gallery. My father stood his ground for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent fury. He had been so sure of his victory. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred I had never seen before. It was the look of a man who had not only lost, but had been publicly outmaneuvered. The bailiff put a firm hand on his arm, and he finally relented, allowing himself to be led out. As he passed me, he leaned in close, his voice a sibilant whisper filled with poison. "You'll pay for this, Alex. Whatever lie you're spinning in there, I'll find it out. And I will destroy you." Chloe followed him, her face ashen. She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading, as if asking me to make it all stop. I just shook my head, a profound sadness washing over me. She had made her choice. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Suddenly it was just me, Sarah, Davies, the judge, and a court stenographer. The vast empty room felt even more intimidating now. The stage was set. The audience was gone. Judge Miller looked down at me, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Evans, you have made an extraordinary claim. The floor is yours. But I will remind you, you are under oath. If you are wasting this court's time with a fabrication, I will hold you in contempt, and I will recommend federal prosecutors review your testimony for perjury charges. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my mouth dry. "Then proceed," she commanded. "Tell me about this unit that doesn't exist." I took a deep breath, the sterile, conditioned air filling my lungs. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer, my hand shaking slightly. I pulled out a single, worn challenge coin and placed it on the polished wood of the defendant's table. It was heavy, made of dark, burnished metal, with an emblem that wouldn't be found on any official military register. "Your Honor," I began, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "It started in a place called the Boneyard, deep in the deserts of Afghanistan. It wasn't on any maps. My team was sent in to retrieve a high-value target. We were told it was a simple snatch and grab. It wasn't." I looked at the coin, the memories flooding back. Sharp and painful. We weren't Army Rangers. We weren't SEALs or Delta. We were something else. We were the unit they sent in when things had gone so wrong that the official channels couldn't be used. We were deniable assets. Ghosts. And on that mission, we found something we weren't supposed to find. Something that got my entire team killed. All except me. I slid the coin across the table towards her. The target we were sent to retrieve, he wasn't a terrorist. He was a scientist, and he was working on a bioweapon for a corporation that had deep ties to powerful people back home. Very powerful people. People whose names would be very familiar to this court. Davies scoffed audibly from his table, shaking his head in disbelief. But the judge didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes were locked on the coin. She picked it up, her expression unreadable, as she ran her thumb over the strange, menacing emblem. Quote 44. I continued, my voice dropping even lower. Quote 45. I paused, letting the weight of my words fill the room. I felt a bead of cold sweat trace a path down my temple. Quote 46. I looked directly at Judge Miller, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Quote 47. The judge's hand. The one holding the coin froze. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. The professional mask of judicial impartiality shattered, replaced by a look of stark, utter disbelief. Her face went pale, her knuckles white where she gripped the coin. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if I had just spoken the name of a ghost. And in that moment, I knew. She didn't just know the name. The name meant something to her, something personal, something dangerous. Quote 48, she whispered, the name a fragile thing in the cavernous silent courtroom. Her eyes darted from me to the sealed file on her desk, then back again. A flicker of what looked like pure, unadulterated fear crossed her face before she mastered it. She slowly rose to her feet, her gaze locked on mine. Her face a mask of stone. But it was too late. I had seen it. I had struck a nerve I never knew existed. The silence that followed my pronouncement of General Thorne's name was different. It wasn't the quiet of a waiting courtroom. It was the dead, heavy silence of a vacuum. Judge Miller remained standing, her hand resting on the bench as if for support. The color had not returned to her face. She looked not at me, but through me, her thoughts 1,000 miles away. In a place I was beginning to suspect was dark and familiar. Davies, for his part, looked utterly bewildered. The name had clearly meant nothing to him. He glanced from me to the judge, a frown creasing his brow, sensing a shift in the room's dynamics that he couldn't comprehend. My own lawyer, Sarah, was staring at me, her mouth hanging slightly open. She had agreed to this strategy out of a desperate, last-ditch hope. But I don't think she ever truly believed the fantastic story I'd outlined for her. Now, seeing the judge's reaction, a flicker of dawning belief and terror was visible in her eyes. Quote 49. Judge Miller repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She finally lowered herself back into her chair, the movement stiff, unnatural. She picked up the challenge coin again, turning it over and over in her fingers. The stenographer's fingers hovered over her keys. Waiting. Quote 50, Davies finally interjected, his voice hesitant. Quote 51. He tried to make it sound ridiculous, but the judge's reaction had stripped his sarcasm of its power. Judge Miller ignored him. Her focus was entirely on me. Mr. Evans, she said, her voice regaining some of its judicial steel, though a tremor remained. You are making an accusation that goes far beyond stolen valor. You are alleging treason, murder, and a massive cover-up orchestrated by one of the most decorated and respected military figures of the last 30 years. You realize this. I am not alleging it, Your Honor. I corrected her gently. I am stating it as a fact. It's the reason my records are buried. It's the reason my life since I came home has been quiet. I know what they are capable of. I know that men like General Thorne don't leave loose ends. For years I've been waiting for a black van to pull up outside my apartment. I never imagined the threat would come from my own father, arguing over my grandfather's money. The bitter irony of it all hung in the air. My father, in his petty greed, had inadvertently dragged me out of the shadows and placed me under the one spotlight in the world I had desperately tried to avoid: a federal court. "And this coin?" she asked, holding it up. "What does it signify?" "It's from my commanding officer, Captain Miller. He gave one to each of us before the mission. He said we were a family, and that coin meant we always had each other's backs. He said if we were ever in a jam we couldn't get out of, we'd find someone who understood what it meant. And they would help. It was the last thing he ever gave me." Judge Miller's eyes narrowed. Quote, 59. "A strange coincidence," I nodded. Quote, 60. The judge flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but in the silent room, it was like a thunderclap. Her hand clenched around the coin so tightly her knuckles were bone white. Her breathing hitched. For a terrifying second, I thought she was going to have a heart attack right there on the bench. Quote, 61, Sarah asked, rising slightly from her seat in concern. Judge Miller waved a dismissive hand, not taking her eyes off me. Her face was a storm of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Grief, shock, anger, and something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. "Tell me about this Captain Miller," she commanded, her voice raw. "He was the best man I ever knew," I said, the words coming easily, truthfully. "Brave, incredibly smart. He had a wife and a son back home. He talked about them all the time. Said his boy was a genius with computers, just like him. He said his wife was the strongest person he'd ever met. He was killed in the first volley of the ambush. He died trying to drag our radio man to cover." The memory was fresh, agonizing. I could still smell the cordite in the dust. The courtroom was silent save for the soft clicking of the stenographer's keys. Judge Miller had her eyes closed. When she opened them, they were glistening. Did he ever mention his wife's name?" My blood ran cold. The pieces were starting to click into place in a way that made my stomach turn. The shared name was no longer a coincidence. It was a key. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He did. Her name was Catherine." The name landed in the room and shattered the remaining silence. Judge Catherine Miller stared at me, the last vestiges of her judicial composure crumbling away. She was no longer a judge presiding over a case. She was a widow hearing a ghost speak her name. The coin in her hand was not evidence. It was a relic from a dead husband she had believed died a hero's death in a random insurgent attack. Quote, 68, she breathed, a sound of such profound, gut-wrenching sorrow that it made my own eyes burn. Davies was now on his feet, his face a mask of utter shock and dawning horror. He was finally understanding. This wasn't a probate case anymore. He had, at the behest of my greedy father, stumbled into a widow's grief and a state secret, all at once. The judge composed herself with a visible, shuddering effort, her training and discipline warring with the personal cataclysm that had just unfolded. She straightened her robes, her movements sharp, precise. She looked at the stenographer. Quote, 69. Quote, 70. Davies began. Quote, 71, her voice was ice. He immediately sat down, looking pale and shaken. She turned her gaze back to me. The grief was still there, a raw wound behind her eyes, but it was now overlaid with a terrifying cold fury. She was no longer just a judge. She was a woman who had just been told her husband's death was not a tragic act of war, but a cold-blooded murder. "Mr. Evans," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "this court is now in recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow. You will be placed in protective custody with the U.S. Marshals until then. You will speak to no one. Not your lawyer, not your family. No one. A marshal will escort you from a private exit." Protective custody? My mind reeled. "Your Honor, On what grounds? Sarah protested, finding her voice. On the grounds that I believe this young man's life is in imminent danger, the judge snapped, her eyes flashing. General Thorne has friends everywhere. If he gets so much as a whisper of what was said in this room today, Mr. Evans will not live to see the sunrise. She banged her gavel, the sound cracking through the tense air like a rifle shot. Court is adjourned. 2 uniformed U.S. Marshals materialized from a side door I hadn't even noticed before. They moved with a quiet, efficient professionalism that was completely different from the courtroom bailiffs. One of them came to my side, his hand resting lightly on my elbow. "Come with us, sir," he said, his voice a low murmur. As they led me away, not back towards the public doors, but towards the judge's private chambers, I looked back. Davies was packing his briefcase with trembling hands, avoiding everyone's eyes. Sarah was watching me go, her face a mixture of fear and awe. And Judge Miller was still on the bench, staring at the challenge coin in her hand, her husband's last gift to his men, my last link to the truth. She looked up and her eyes met mine one last time. In them, I no longer saw a judge. I saw an ally, an avenger. And she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a promise. A promise that my father's petty lawsuit had just unleashed a storm he could never have imagined. He had wanted to destroy my honor. He had no idea that in the process he may have just handed me the weapon I needed to uncover the truth and just maybe get justice for the men I'd lost. But as the heavy door closed behind me, a chilling thought snaked its way into my mind. General Thorne was powerful. How powerful? Was he powerful enough to reach me, even inside a federal courthouse surrounded by marshals? Was I being led to safety, or into a more sophisticated trap? The U.S. Marshals didn't take me to a holding cell. They led me through a labyrinth of private corridors behind the courtroom, the air growing cooler, the sound of the outside world fading to a distant hum. The walls were wood-paneled, lined with portraits of stern-faced judges from decades past, their painted eyes seeming to follow my progress. My mind was a whirlwind of the last hour's events. My father's sneering face, the judge's shocking transformation, the weight of the secret I had finally shared. The marshal's grip on my arm was firm, but not aggressive. It wasn't the grip of an arresting officer. It was the grip of a bodyguard. They brought me to a small, windowless conference room. It contained nothing but a heavy mahogany table and a half-dozen chairs. A single encrypted telephone sat in the center of the table. One marshal stood by the door, his hand resting near the butt of his sidearm, while the other gestured for me to sit. "We'll be right outside," the second marshal said. "Don't touch the phone. Someone will be here for you shortly." The door clicked shut, and I was alone. The silence was absolute. For the first time, the sheer magnitude of what I had done began to sink in. I had named General Thorne in a federal court, even a sealed one. I had turned a squalid family dispute into a matter of national security. I had handed a grieving widow a narrative of her husband's death that was infinitely more painful than the one she had lived with for years. Was it the right thing to do? For Captain Miller and the rest of my team, absolutely. For my own survival? I wasn't so sure. Judge Miller was right. Thorne was not a man who tolerated loose ends. He was a master of the political game, a 4-star general with connections that ran through the Pentagon, the intelligence community, and corporate America. The bioweapon my team had stumbled upon was his brainchild, a pet project developed in the shadows with a defense contractor who had made billions off the war. I didn't know the whole story, but I knew enough to understand that Thorne had sacrificed my team to protect that secret and the powerful people behind it. An hour passed, then 2. The silence stretched my nerves thin. Every creak of the old building, every distant sound from the hallway made me jump. I replayed my father's whispered threat over and over in my head. "I will destroy you." He had no idea. He thought he was playing checkers, and he had just kicked over a grandmaster's chessboard. He wasn't the one I had to worry about destroying me anymore. Finally, the door opened. It wasn't the marshals. It was Judge Catherine Miller. She was out of her judicial robes, dressed in a simple, dark pantsuit. She looked smaller, more vulnerable, but her eyes held a fire I hadn't seen on the bench. It was the cold, hard fire of purpose. She carried a slim leather briefcase and a single file folder. She sat down opposite me, placing the folder on the table between us. She didn't open it. "I've made some calls," she said, her voice devoid of any judicial formality. It was just her, Catherine, talking to me, Alex. I still have a few friends in places that matter. People my husband trusted. People who owe me. She looked at me, her gaze intense. "Everything you said in there, about the mission, the betrayal, it aligns with some things Jake told me. Vague things. He called me the night before the mission. He sounded worried. He said they'd been given a new objective, that the intel felt wrong. He told me he loved me and our son, and that if anything happened to him, there was a safe deposit box in a bank in Virginia. He told me the key was hidden in his old copy of The Count of Monte Cristo." My heart hammered in my chest. "Did you ever open it?" She shook her head, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "No. After he died, I received the official report. Ambush. Heroic sacrifice. They gave me a flag and a posthumous medal. It was neat. Tidy. I told myself his worries were just the normal stress of combat. I couldn't bear to look in that box. I think deep down, I was afraid of what I might find. I didn't want the hero's memory to be tainted by some conspiracy theory. It was easier to believe the lie." She tapped the file folder. "Until today." She took a deep breath. "The man you named, General Thorne, he was my husband's mentor. He's the one who fast-tracked Jake's career. He delivered the eulogy at his funeral. He held my hand at the graveside and told me my husband was the finest soldier he had ever known." Her voice was laced with venom. "He's our son's godfather." The sickness rose in my throat. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Thorne hadn't just killed his protege. He had comforted the widow, weaving himself into the fabric of the family he had destroyed. "I spoke with the director of the U.S. Marshals Service," she continued, her voice all business again. "The protective detail is real. You are now officially designated a material witness in a potential federal investigation. No one gets to you without my express authorization. But we are living on borrowed time. Thorne will hear about this. Maybe not the specifics. But he will hear that a probate case involving a dead soldier from a ghost unit was suddenly sealed and moved to a secure chamber. He's not a fool. He will start connecting the dots." "What do we do?" I asked. "Not we," she corrected me. "You have done your part. You have sounded the alarm. Now you need to stay alive. The rest is up to me. That safe deposit box, I am flying to Virginia tonight. Whatever Jake left in there, I have a feeling it's the proof we need. Proof that goes beyond the testimony of a lone survivor." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "There's something else. Alex, your father. His lawyer filed an emergency motion to have you psychologically evaluated. They're claiming your testimony was the delusional fantasy of a traumatized veteran, that you have fabricated this entire conspiracy to keep your inheritance." I scoffed. "Of course he did. He can't win on the facts, so he'll try to destroy my credibility." "It's more than that," the judge said grimly. "The doctor they requested for the evaluation is a Dr. Alistair Finch. Does that name mean anything to you?" I searched my memory. "No. Should it?" "Dr. Finch is a retired Army psychiatrist. He used to be the head of psychological operations at Fort Bragg. He's also served on the board of directors for the last 10 years for Omni Defense Solutions." The name hit me like a physical blow. Omni Defense. That was the contractor. The company that had developed the bioweapon. The company that had funded Thorne's secret project. Quote, 100, I whispered. Quote, 101, she confirmed. Quote, 102. The cold reality of it washed over me. This was the trap. Not a black van on the street, but a needle in a quiet room administered under the color of law. My father had unwittingly handed my enemies the perfect weapon to silence me forever. Quote, 103, she said. Quote, 104. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. Quote, 105, I thought back. My mind racing through faces, names, memories, shrouded in dust and pain. Most were dead. The others, we were ghosts. We were trained to be disconnected, to leave no trace. We didn't have unit barbecues or family days. But there was one, a comms tech. A kid we called Cypher because he could break any code. He wasn't a trigger puller. He was stateside, our link to the real world, feeding us intel from a secure bunker in Nevada. He wasn't on the mission. He would have been the one to receive Captain Miller's final garbled transmission. He would have seen the official report get sanitized. He would know the truth. But I hadn't spoken to him in years. We had all scattered to the winds, trying to forget, trying to stay hidden. Quote, 106, I said slowly. Quote, 107. Judge Miller opened the file folder on the table. It was empty, except for a single sheet of paper with a satellite photo printed on it. It showed a remote cabin, deep in the mountains of Montana. A thin wisp of smoke curled from its chimney. Quote, 108, she said, sliding the photo across the table to me. Quote, 109. She paused. Her expression grave. Underscore. Quote underscore 110 underscore. My blood turned to ice. They had found him. Thorne's people were already moving, cleaning up the loose ends I didn't even know were still there. We need to get to him, Alex, she said, her voice urgent. We need to get him before Thorne does. A marshal team is being prepped to fly out tonight, but they won't know who they're looking for. They'll just be following orders. You're the only one he might trust, the only one who can convince him to talk before it's too late. She leaned in, her eyes boring into mine. The question is, are you willing to walk out of the relative safety of this courthouse and go with them? Are you willing to walk back into the line of fire? The question hung in the sterile air of the conference room, heavy and sharp. Walk back into the line of fire. It wasn't a metaphor. For years, I had lived a half-life, a ghost haunting the edges of my own existence, precisely to avoid this moment. I had dodged shadows, real and imagined, started at the sound of unexpected cars, and treated every new acquaintance with a layer of suspicion. The relative safety of the courthouse felt like a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Out there, in the vast open wilderness of Montana, there would be no walls, no bailiffs, no rules of evidence. There would only be the hunt. I looked at the satellite photo of Ben's cabin. It was so isolated, a tiny speck of human existence in an ocean of green. He had tried to disappear even more completely than I had. He was smarter than me. He knew the only real safety was in total isolation. And now, that isolation had been breached. The man in the dark suit. The black sedan. Thorne's reach was long. If they've already found him, I said, my voice low, we might be too late. Thorne's people don't make social calls. Maybe, Judge Miller conceded. Her expression grim. But the surveillance report said the man left after 30 minutes. The smoke is still coming from the chimney. It's possible it was a first contact. A warning. A threat. Or maybe Ben is smarter than they gave him credit for. Maybe he told them nothing. She pushed the photo closer to me. But we can't operate on maybes. If Ben is alive, he's the only person on Earth who can corroborate your story. Without him, it's your word against a 4-star general's, Your father's motion for a psychological evaluation will look reasonable. They'll hand you over to Dr. Finch, and you will disappear. We lose. My husband's murderers walk free." Her words were like stones, each one landing with a heavy thud of finality. She wasn't just asking me to risk my life. She was telling me it was the only move left on the board. My carefully constructed quiet life was over, one way or another. I could either be swallowed by the system Thorne controlled, or I could meet the threat head-on my own terms. At least in Montana, I'd be in my element. I was more at home in the wilderness than I ever was in a courtroom. I looked up from the photo and met her gaze. _quote, _119, _A, flicker of relief. So profound it was almost painful to watch, crossed her face. Quote, 120. She stood, all business once more. Quote, 121. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. Quote, 122, she said, her voice softer now. Quote, 123. With a final determined nod, she was gone. The marshals re-entered the room, their demeanor subtly changed. Before, I was a witness they were protecting. Now I was part of an operation. The journey was a blur of seamless, quiet efficiency. We bypassed public terminals, driving in a black armored SUV directly onto the tarmac where a sleek Learjet waited, its engines already whining. The flight was smooth and silent. I sat alone, watching the sprawling lights of the city give way to the vast, inky blackness of the heartland. I tried to sleep, but my mind was a battlefield. I saw the faces of my team. I heard the crackle of the radio, the screams, the sickening thud of the explosion that threw me into the ravine. And I saw Captain Miller's face, his eyes full of a desperate urgency as he handed me that coin. Find someone who understands what this means. I was finally doing it. We landed at a small private airstrip somewhere in western Montana as the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky. The air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. A rugged-looking Jeep Cherokee was waiting for us. The lead marshal, a tall, no-nonsense man named Henderson, handed me a duffel bag. Inside was a set of practical, rugged outdoor gear. Boots, thermal layers, a heavy jacket, and a satellite phone. Quote 124, he said. Quote 125. There was no firearm in the bag. They were still lawmen, and I was still a civilian witness. The drive into the mountains was tense. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to a rough, muddy track that was barely a road at all. Henderson drove with practiced skill, his eyes constantly scanning the dense forest that pressed in on either side. Quote 126, he said, pulling the Jeep to a stop where the track became impassable. Quote 127. I looked at him. Quote 128. Henderson's jaw tightened. Quote 129. I nodded, but a cold knot of dread was forming in my gut. Thorne's people didn't do peaceful. We moved through the woods with practiced silence. The marshals were good, but I was better. This was my world. My senses, dulled by years of civilian life, came roaring back. I noticed the unnatural silence of the birds, the fresh snap of a twig off the path that wasn't from our passing, the faint, almost imperceptible smell of gasoline that didn't belong here. We crested a small ridge that overlooked the cabin. It was just as it looked in the photo, a rustic log structure with a stone chimney. The smoke was thicker now, a steady gray plume rising into the pale morning sky. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. A window on the side of the cabin was shattered. The front door, a heavy slab of timber, was slightly ajar. Henderson saw it too. He held up a hand signaling a halt. He drew his weapon. The other two marshals followed suit, fanning out into a tactical formation. My own hands felt unnervingly empty. This is no longer a simple contact, Henderson whispered into his radio. Potential hostile situation. Alex, stay behind us. But I wasn't listening. My eyes were fixed on the cabin, my instincts screaming at me. The smell of gasoline was stronger here. The scene felt staged. The open door, the broken window. It was too obvious. It was an invitation. A trap. Underscore quote. Underscore 133 underscore. I hissed, grabbing Henderson's arm. Don't approach the front. It's a setup. What are you talking about? He whispered back, his eyes fixed on the door. It's a classic funnel, I explained, my voice low and urgent. You draw your enemy's attention to the obvious point of entry while you wait to ambush them from the flanks. We need to circle around, check the back. Henderson hesitated for a fraction of a second, a conflict in his eyes between his training and my warning. But he must have seen the certainty on my face. Okay, he breathed. Do it. Wallace, you're with him. We'll hold here, provide cover. I nodded to the younger marshal, Wallace, and we began a wide, silent arc through the dense undergrowth, moving towards the rear of the cabin. The forest floor was soft, masking our footsteps. As we got closer, I saw fresh tracks in the damp earth near the back of the property. Heavy boot prints. At least 2 individuals. And they weren't Ben's. We reached the tree line behind the cabin. There was a small woodshed, its door also slightly ajar. I held up a hand, signaling Wallace to stop. I could hear something now. A low, rhythmic beeping sound. Faint but steady. My blood ran cold. I knew that sound. I had heard it in my nightmares for years. I motioned for Wallace to stay put and crept forward, my body low to the ground. I peered around the edge of the woodshed. And then I saw it. It wasn't a complex device, just a simple, ugly block of C4 strapped to a propane tank. A small digital timer was wired to it. The red numbers clear in the morning gloom. 000114, 000113. It was a trap. But not for us. It was a dead man's switch. A final screw you from someone who knew they were already gone. My eyes scanned the scene, and that's when I saw him. Ben. He was slumped against the back wall of the cabin, just out of sight from the front. He wasn't moving. There was a dark, ugly stain spreading across the front of his shirt. But his right hand was still clutching a small military-grade detonator, his thumb resting on the button. The man in the suit hadn't been a visitor. He had been an assassin. And Ben, with his dying breath, had armed a bomb that would not only kill his murderer, but erase any evidence of what had happened here. And the assassin? I followed the tracks leading away from Ben's body. They led directly to the woodshed, to the spot right behind me where Marshal Wallace was now standing, watching my back. The assassin hadn't left. He was still here. My head snapped around. Marshal Wallace wasn't looking at the cabin. He was looking directly at me, and in his eyes I saw not the focused gaze of a lawman, but the cold, dead calm of a professional killer. The man in the suit hadn't come alone. He had been a distraction. The real threat had been on the plane with me the whole time. He had a faint, cruel smile on his lips as he slowly raised his service pistol, the suppressor on the end making it look long and sinister. 00:00:58, 00:00:57. The beeping seemed to grow louder, counting down the last seconds of my life. Wallace wasn't a marshal. He was one of Thorne's men. He had played his part perfectly. He had let me lead him right to the back of the cabin, separating us from the others. He wasn't just here to kill Ben. He was here to kill me. And Ben's final act of defiance was about to take us all out together. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing in the 54 seconds I had left. The rhythmic beep of the timer was the only sound in the world, a metronome counting down to oblivion. Wallace's smile widened. He had me, unarmed, exposed, with a bomb at my back and his silenced pistol leveled at my chest. From his perspective, the situation was perfectly resolved. He could shoot me, and Ben's bomb would erase the evidence, likely killing the other marshals as a bonus. General Thorne would receive a clean report. Case closed. But he hesitated. It was a flicker of professional pride, the predator wanting to savor the moment. He wanted to see the understanding, the fear, in my eyes. And that flicker was the only opening I was going to get. Wallace said, his voice a low, mocking whisper that was nothing like the professional tone he'd used before. Quote, 142. My mind was racing, processing angles, options, a dozen different combat scenarios from my training slamming into the forefront of my consciousness. Surrender was death. A frontal assault was suicide. I needed a distraction. I needed to break his aim. My eyes darted past him, into the woods. Quote 143, I screamed, pouring every ounce of desperate conviction I had into the words. It was a pathetic bluff, but it was all I had. For a split second, Wallace's focus broke. His eyes flickered to his left, an instinctual reaction to a perceived threat from his flank. It was a quarter of a second, a blink of an eye, but it was enough. I didn't run. I lunged, not at him, but to the side, diving behind the meager cover of the woodshed. The first shot from his silenced pistol was a dull thump, and I felt a searing, white-hot pain rip through my left shoulder. The force of it spun me around, and I slammed hard into the log wall of the shed. My vision swam with black spots. The arm went numb, useless. 37 seconds. From the ridge, I heard Henderson shouting, "Shots fired! Wallace, report! Alex, report!" Wallace fired again, the round splintering the wood inches from my head. He was moving, closing the distance, his footsteps crunching on the forest floor. He was methodical, a hunter cornering his wounded prey. My back was pressed against the shed. The beeping was louder here, right next to the propane tank. My mind was screaming, "Think! Think!" I was weaponless, wounded, and pinned down. My training kicked in, overriding the pain and the panic. Use your environment. Create a weapon. My good hand scrabbled against the ground, searching for anything. A rock, a thick branch. My fingers closed around something cold, heavy, and metal. An old axe left by the woodpile. The handle was slick with morning dew. The head rusted but heavy. 25 seconds. Wallace appeared around the corner of the shed. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of cold fury. He had been expecting a clean, simple kill, and I had made it messy. He raised his pistol for the final shot. I didn't hesitate. With a roar that was more animal than human, I swung the axe. It was a wild, clumsy, one-armed swing, powered by adrenaline and desperation. I wasn't aiming to kill, just to disarm. The heavy, rusted head of the axe connected with his wrist with a sickening crunch of bone. He screamed, a high, strangled sound of agony and surprise. The pistol clattered to the ground. He staggered back, clutching his shattered hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. 19 seconds. I didn't have time to finish him. I stumbled past him, my legs feeling like lead, my shoulder a blazing inferno. My objective was singular. The bomb. I fell to my knees beside Ben's body. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the Montana sky. The detonator was still clutched in his hand, his thumb locked down on the button in a death grip. It was a pressure release trigger. If I moved his thumb, the circuit would break. The bomb would go off. I looked at the device. C4, propane, and a simple timer wired to the detonator in Ben's hand. But there was another wire. A thin, almost invisible tripwire running from the detonator and staked to the ground a few feet away. Ben had been thorough. If anyone tried to move his body, the wire would pull the detonator from his hand, releasing the switch. A double failsafe. 12 seconds. Henderson and the other marshal were charging down the ridge now, shouting, drawn by the commotion. They were running straight into the blast radius. Quote, 145, I screamed, my voice raw. Quote, 146. They faltered, their eyes widening as they saw the timer. 9 seconds. I couldn't move Ben's thumb. I couldn't move his body. I had to disable the timer itself. My eyes scanned the crude device. The wires were a simple positive-negative circuit leading from the timer's battery to the blasting cap embedded in the C4. My fingers, slick with my own blood, fumbled with the plastic casing of the timer. It was screwed shut. No time. 6 seconds. My eyes landed on Wallace's discarded pistol lying in the dirt a few feet away. The suppressor. A plan, insane and desperate, formed in my mind. 5 seconds. I lunged for the gun, my body screaming in protest. 4 seconds. I rolled onto my back, propping the pistol with my trembling good hand. 3 seconds. I aimed at the small LCD screen of the timer. A 1 in a million shot. If I missed and hit the C4, it wouldn't matter. If I hit the battery, it might short the circuit. If I shattered the screen and the delicate electronics beneath. 2 seconds. There was no time to aim. I just pointed and squeezed the trigger. The silenced pistol coughed. The small, subsonic round zipped across the few feet of space and struck the timer. There was a crack of plastic, a shower of tiny sparks. The red numbers vanished. 1 second. Silence. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. The beeping had stopped. I lay there on my back, covered in dirt and blood, staring up at the sky, the axe and the pistol lying beside me. Henderson and the other marshal skidded to a halt a safe distance away, their weapons trained on the scene, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Wallace was on the ground, groaning, cradling his mangled wrist. Slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up. The pain in my shoulder was a living thing, a fire that consumed my entire left side. I looked down at Ben, my friend, my last link to my team. He had saved my life with his final desperate act. Quote 147. I said to Henderson, my voice cracking. Quote 148. Henderson cautiously approached. His gun still trained on Wallace. Underscore. Quote underscore 149 underscore, he demanded, kicking the pistol away from the groaning man's reach. He's Thorne's man, I gritted out through the pain. He was with us the whole time. He's the assassin. It was all crashing down on me now. The exhaustion, the adrenaline dump, the blood loss. The world started to spin, the edges of my vision going dark. But before I passed out, I saw something that cut through the haze. Ben's left hand, the one not holding the detonator, was tucked inside his jacket. A small square object was clutched in his fingers, as if he had been trying to get it out before he died. It was a digital voice recorder. I stumbled forward, my legs giving out, and collapsed next to him. My hand closed over his, prying the small device from his cold fingers just as Henderson reached my side. Quote 152. Henderson yelled into his radio. Quote 153. I clutched the recorder to my chest. A final desperate hope surging through me. Ben was a comms tech, a wire guy. He lived and breathed signals and recordings. He would have known they were coming. He wouldn't have gone down without a fight. And he wouldn't have gone down without hitting record. The last thing I heard before the world went black was the distant chopping sound of an approaching helicopter. And in my mind, a clear, sharp echo of Judge Miller's voice. I have a feeling it's the proof we need. Ben hadn't been able to get to his safe deposit box. But maybe, just maybe, I was holding it in my hand. And maybe, just maybe, it contained the last words of the man who had murdered him. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a different machine. Not a timer, but a heart monitor. The world swam into focus slowly, a blur of white walls and the sterile smell of antiseptic. My shoulder was a block of dull, throbbing pain, tightly bandaged and immobilized against my chest. A federal marshal, not Henderson, sat in a chair by the door, his expression impassive. Judge Miller was standing by the window, looking out at a gray, overcast sky. She turned as she heard me stir, her face etched with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Quote, 154, she said, her voice quiet. Quote, 155. Quote, 156, I echoed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Quote, 157. Quote, 158, she agreed, her expression hardening. Quote, 159. She walked over to the bedside. Quote, 160. She held up the digital voice recorder I had grabbed from his hand. It was small and black, scuffed from the fall. My head was foggy from the painkillers, but my mind latched onto her words. She said, her voice laced with a cold fury. Quote, 164. She paused, letting the weight of it sink in. Quote, 165. A fresh wave of grief washed over her face, but she pushed through it, her jaw set. Quote, 166. The confession we needed. The proof. Not just my word against a general's, but a cold-blooded admission from the assassin's own mouth. I asked. She replied. The relief was so immense it was dizzying. We had won. Ben's death, my team's death, Captain Miller's death. They would not go unanswered. What about my father? I asked, the thought of the trial suddenly returning to me. It felt like a lifetime ago. Judge Miller's expression soured. That brings us to the second piece of news. I flew back overnight. This morning at 10 a.m. we reconvened your probate case. The scene she described was almost comical in its bathos. My father and his lawyer, Davies, had arrived in court that morning brimming with confidence, ready to argue their motion to have me committed. They clearly thought I had been neutralized. They probably assumed their man Finch had me locked away somewhere already. The courtroom was sealed again. My lawyer, Sarah, was there, looking pale and nervous. Judge Miller entered and took the bench, her face an unreadable mask of judicial calm. She called the court to order and immediately denied the motion for psychological evaluation, stating simply that new, verifiable evidence had come to light that rendered it moot. My father, Richard, was on his feet instantly, protesting, his face turning a blotchy red. What evidence? He's a liar. He's delusional. Please be seated, Mr. Evans, the judge ordered, her voice like cracking ice. Or I will have you removed. She then addressed the court. Over the past 48 hours, this court has been made aware of certain facts pertaining to the defendant's military service. While the full details remain a matter of national security, I have received verification from the highest levels of the Department of Defense and the Justice Department confirming that Mr. Alex Evans is a decorated veteran who served with extreme distinction and honor in a special operations unit. The sensitive nature of his service is the reason for his sealed records, not a lack of service. A gasp went through the room. My father's jaw dropped. Davies looked like he had been slapped. Furthermore, the judge continued, her gaze sweeping over my father and sister, this court finds that the plaintiffs, Richard and Chloe Evans, brought this case forward not out of a genuine concern for the honor of veterans, but out of malicious greed. They knowingly and willfully attempted to defame a combat veteran for financial gain, using his trauma and his sworn duty to secrecy as weapons against him. Her eyes narrowed, locking onto my father. This court finds that it is you, Mr. Evans, who fails to meet the standard of upstanding moral character outlined in your father's will. Your actions are a disgrace to his memory, she banged the gavel. Therefore, I am dismissing this case with prejudice. The last will and testament of Sergeant Major Thomas Evans will be executed as written. The estate is awarded in its entirety to his grandson, Alex Evans. She wasn't finished. Underscore, quote underscore 180 underscore. My father collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. His smug confidence, his lifelong smirk, had not just vanished. It had been annihilated, leaving behind the hollowed-out shell of a petty, greedy man who had been exposed to the world. Chloe was openly weeping beside him. As Judge Miller recounted the scene, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the truth. It was about honor. My grandfather had known. He had seen the truth in me, just as he had seen the emptiness in his own son. General Thorne was arrested an hour ago at his estate in Virginia, the judge finished, her voice thick with emotion. Along with 2 board members from Omni Defense. It's the start. The whole rotten structure is coming down. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. My husband has justice, Alex. You and Ben gave that to him. You gave that to me. A few weeks later, I was released from the hospital. The inheritance was a complicated, messy affair, but I had good people helping me now. Sarah, my once overwhelmed public defender, was now my private attorney. Her career launched into the stratosphere by the case. The first thing I did was set up a foundation in the names of the men on my team, including Captain Jacob Miller, to support the families of soldiers killed in covert operations, the ones who don't get the public parades or the government benefits. My father tried to call once. I didn't answer. I heard through Sarah that he and Chloe were drowning in legal trouble, facing potential criminal charges. His business was failing as word of his stunt got out. He had gambled everything to steal my honor, and had lost his own in the process. One cool autumn afternoon, I found myself standing in Arlington National Cemetery with Catherine Miller. We stood before a simple white headstone that read Jacob Jake Miller. It was quiet, peaceful. I'm having a new stone commissioned, she said softly. One that lists his real commendations. The Secretary of Defense unsealed his file personally. She looked at me. He'd be proud of you, Alex. You honored the coin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy, burnished piece of metal he had given me. I placed it on top of the headstone, where it glinted in the afternoon sun. I had fulfilled my oath. I had brought the truth to light. The ghosts of my past were still with me, but they were quieter now. They were at peace. And for the first time since I'd come home from the war, so was I.